All right, so on 17, they're asking you to use the mid-segment theorem that we talked about in regards to the mid-segment being parallel to the third side and also being equal to half the length of the third side. Okay, so put it in a new slide real quick. All right, so look at this. All they ask you to do is find x, and I think the people throughout the day that have been having trouble with this saw x right here, and then saw, okay, well, that segment then needs to relate to that segment. Would you guys agree with that? Okay, so we write that 4x plus 8. Sorry about that. We write that 4x plus 8, which is my third side, is equal to some format of y. Okay, now we have to decide where we put our ratio of 1/2 or 2, because right now these two things are not equal. Okay, you would say that the mid-segment is half the third side, right? So this is the mid-segment, is the equal sign, and this is your third side. So mid-segment is half meaning 1 or 2, of meaning multiply, third side. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, so that's where that 1/2 needs to go. Some people have said, well, I like to look at the idea of taking the mid-segment and doubling it to get to the third side. That's fine. So you would take your mid-segment, which is y, make it 2y, equal then your third side of 4x plus 8. Either one of those equations is fine. Okay? And to be honest with you, one way of solving this top equation is to get rid of the fraction right away, right? Multiply everything by 2. And what you have now, because this is a grouping, so that's one object. This is one object. This is one object. Okay? So we can view those objects as just individual numbers. And if I had like 2 times 3 times 5, could I group any two of those that I wanted to? Maybe I group those two and do that multiplication first and then change it to 6 times 5, right? Or I could take these two and rewrite it as 2 times 15. So if I've got 3 things up here, okay, I can take any 2 of those 3 using my associative property and say those 2 probably make a little bit more sense to multiply together first, right? Multiply those together, you get 1, and then you have 1 times 4x plus 8, which gives me 4x plus 8, okay? And if I multiply the left-hand side by 2, I should do the same thing over here, multiply this side by 2. And if I do it that way, does that not get me that equation right there? Okay, so eventually, whichever one of these equations you want to start with, you will eventually probably develop the other one. Okay, there's also an additional way of dealing with this one. You can distribute your 1/2, because these are both even numbers. It makes sense to do it this way. You get 2x plus 4 is equal to y. And that equation does the exact same thing that one does. If you were to graph both those in the xy plane, they are the same lines. Okay? But here's the issue. Those equations that we just created both have an x and a y in them, right? And I can't solve them if I don't know what x is and I don't know what y is. Okay? So we look for another equation. The other equation, and I'm going to erase everything because I really don't end up needing that stuff. The other equation is looking at that mid-segment compared to that side. Because now I can say 2 of these x's, 2 of these mid-segments, should equal 1 of these, right? So there's 10x minus 40. And now I can solve that equation a little bit easier, right? Okay. You could also, like I said, I could say x, my mid-segment, is half the third side. So if you want to write it that way, both those equations will solve for x and get you your value for x. Does that kind of make sense? And throughout the day, a lot of people have been, well, I get stuck on the y equals, or 2y equals 4x plus 8. I don't know where to go from there. You got to come up with another equation. It just happenstance in this one that other equation you come up with doesn't have y in it, and you can solve for x right away. Is that all right? So the y and the 4x plus 8 for this problem are just clutter that you don't need. Okay? Jalen?
How do you know x is half of that?
Yesterday's theorem said that because that's a midpoint right there, and that's a midpoint right there. So this segment here is called a mid segment, and we had a theorem that says when you take the midpoint of a side of a triangle and the midpoint of another side of the triangle and connect them, that distance will always 100% of the time be half of that distance. It's also going to be another feature is that's going to be parallel. We didn't prove that. We actually can't prove that yet because we have to use similarity to do that, and we haven't talked yet about similarity. Maybe eventually, once we learn some stuff about proportions and that stuff, we'll come back to this and prove that theorem. Any others on that assignment that you guys want to talk about? We feel okay with like question 18, the coordinate geometry. We're feeling a little bit better with those types of problems. I think the more we see of those, just like anything else, the more you practice, the better you're going to get at it. Those are going to keep coming up. But if you guys don't have any other questions, we'll get into the next section.